This lecture is on the causes of the Civil War, and in many ways, this is a culmination of this semester on U.S. history to 1877. All of this, you can look at U.S. history previous to this point. This is sort of a violation of historiography because we know that the Civil War perhaps did not have to happen. So this is the philosophy of historical contingency. So nothing, no decisions that were made, no course that took place had to happen. It was not predestined. It was not determined. Yet, looking over American history, we've covered the pre-colonial period, the indigenous period, we've covered the colonial period, the revolutionary period, early America, Jacksonianism, the Second Great Awakening, all of the market revolution, the first industrial revolution, all of the periodization that historians impose on history. We said it before that life just happens, things just happen, and then later scholars come and periodize them. But it seems like everything was leading to a massive cataclysmic conflict over the status of African Americans, the status of Black people, the status of Black captives, enslaved Black people. It seems like that. And we've covered the revolutionary period where so-called founders like Thomas Jefferson said, I tremble for the state of this nation because I know, what does he say? It's like holding a wolf by the ears. Slavery is. The wolf will bite you, and it's moving, and it's rabid, it's menacing when you have it by the ears, but if you let it go, then it will really bite you. So this is a slavery is a conundrum. It is a quandary. What do we do about it? And sure enough, this slavery, the enslavement of Black human beings, is what causes this fledgling union to fracture, to dissolve. Never let anyone tell you that Black people have not mattered in the history of this nation, that Black people have not been central in the history of this nation. Then how do you explain the Civil War? Oh, it's about states' rights. States' rights for what? It is clearly written in the Confederate States of America, the CSA, Charter, Constitution, the Constitution and statements of individual Southern states that seceded, that this is about slavery. Just read the original documents. This is about slavery. We are leaving for slavery. Yes, our rights, our states' rights to enslave Black people. Yes, but that is the right that we want to protect. So all of this culminates to the status of Black people, the status of Black people. We said previously that it is estimated that there were a total, let's say from 1619 to 1865, there were a total of 10 million Black people, and they worked an estimated 410 billion hours. So there is so much here. What I want you to do is tell me for the final. There could be, let's say, five or six. What do you think are the primary catalysts for the American Civil War from 1861 to 1865? What are the major catalysts? I am going to share about 21, 20 catalysts with you, causes of the Civil War, but I want you on the final to identify the ones that you think are the most important and then say why, argue for why. I also want you to theorize, try to get at why did the Civil War happen in 1861? Why not 1850? Why not 1836? I'm being random here. There's nothing about those dates that I think would, unless maybe somebody could argue for that. But why 1861? That's another thing that we need to get to the bottom of it. And then I want you to theorize, what did this mean for the United States? What did this mean for the United States? Some people posit that the Civil War was a second American Revolution. We know about the War of 1812, the Mexican American War. A lot of people posit that these could be also seen as types of independence. But remember that we discussed, what is it that makes America America? So if it's any sort of democracy, if you say that America is not about ethnicity, it's not about nationality, it is about what are some other things? It's not about religion, because this could have unified some other types of nation states. If this is an imagined community that is the United States of America, what binds it as a community? It has been posited that it is the belief in democracy, that the people rule, and that the will of the people is the mechanism, should determine a government, rulership, a government. So that is the laws, the policies, the modus operandi, the leadership of a government should be determined by popular vote. If that's the case, what year, let's let's specify the year, did the United States become a democracy? What year did the most people, let's say democracy, by a quorum, by a plurality, what year did that happen? So some people say, well, it definitely didn't happen in 1776, 1783, 1787. During the Jacksonian period, they say more white men were enfranchised, more white men got the vote and had a political voice. But still, we're talking about the majority of people in America, women and Black people, Native Americans. They did not have a voice. So, how was that a democracy? Well, it was a civil war because then everybody was free. Some people posit that after the Civil War, for a brief time, Black men could vote thanks to the Union winning and the force of soldiers, Union soldiers who are enforcing that vote. But then that was rescinded, that was retracted. So at what point did America become a true democracy? Some people say it was 1965 with the Voting Acts, which finally, I would say, free and clear enfranchised Black women. That could be a case that you could make 1920 when women were enfranchised. Some women were enfranchised. Maybe white women were enfranchised in 1920. So I want you to theorize, what is America? And when was it founded? When did America really become America? Founded on democracy in some practical way. So enough people now in America have the vote that you can call it a true democracy. It is a tough, tough question. So With that preamble, in good early American fashion, what are the causes of the Civil War? What led to the American Civil War of 1861 to 1865? First of all, slavery. Slavery is the central issue, I would say, in early American history. So it's the central issue from, let's say, I don't know, let's choose a random date, 1619, which we said was the start of American chattel slavery, or if you want to say British administered, the British people, the ancestors of British people, and let's include all of what the UK now, or what we'll call the British Isles. So England, Ireland, Scotland, throw in Wales. So all of that whole island system, right? What we now know as American slavery started for our purposes in Jamestown in 1619. And I would argue that slavery was a central issue in America, in American politics, all the way up to 1865. If there was not slavery, there would not have been a civil war as we know it. And so the fate, the activity of millions of Black people is central to the United States and American history. Why do I have here the founding documents as a catalyst for the Civil War? Think about this. It is simply this. If America never made any claims to democracy, to liberty, to some sort of republic, that means a government by the people, okay? Literally the public, the polis. If it never made these claims that's what it was about, that's what it was going for, that was its ideal, there never would have been a basis for slavery, the freedom of Black people. There never would have been an argument about it. What I mean to say is that, like a boogeyman, like a, I don't know, a creepy watcher, behind every argument about slavery, about the state of Black people, are the original American documents, which are saying we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We, the people, have these rights. So America is making a claim to this, and this shadows, it foregrounds, it it is the foundation for all discussions of the disposition of Black people in America. As Martin Luther King Jr. would famously say, and I think geniusly say, America has written a check of freedom, of liberty, of democracy that it cannot cash because it is morally bankrupt. King said that, I don't know, 1963, 1965. So we're still using these arguments, and this is the foundation for these American conflicts and arguments. And if you say that, hey, this isn't about an American right, this is a human right, you are exactly correct. It is a human right that all people are free and not enslaved. That is a human right. Forget about America. But the founders were arguing that that was a human right, quote unquote, of course, always in scare quotes, the founders. They were arguing that that was a human right. And then that human right became an American right. So that is definitely a catalyst, because these founding documents, I think that one of the genius of the founding documents is that it has the ability to encompass all of humanity. This is a basic human document, and it has room for expansion, endless expansion perhaps, and application to all people in all times. That is the definition of a classic book, classic music, whatever. It appeals to people wherever they are. It's almost universal. And this, I think the Declaration of Independence, right, yeah, the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution. I think that these documents were used in like what 60, 70, maybe more, maybe over 100 of other nations. They employed the language here. They use these documents to articulate their own nationhood and their own notions of freedom and governance. All right, the Second Great Awakening. Why do I include this? Why do I include this? What does the so-called Christianization of America have to do with the Civil War? Well, think about it this way. This Second Great Awakening, once again, these dates tend to be arbitrary, but let's say after the American Revolution to the 1840s, 1850s, some people end it sooner. This is the period of great revival, great religious revival in the United States, and Americans were becoming primarily Methodist and Baptists. So they were converting to Methodism and Baptist. I would say primarily, of course, there were many other religions, but these two religions became the dominant religion. And Americans began to think about their nation. I shouldn't say began to think about, because in many ways, obviously, there were strains of Christianity that were all in the early colonies and all in the foundings. Okay, we've talked about the Puritans and the Pilgrims, whatever exactly that means today. What is a pilgrim, and what is a Puritan? But we talked about them and how they had notions that America was to be a Christian nation, a city on a hill, and it was to civilize, i.e., Christianize the entire world, all of the peoples of the world. And so this is in some ways built into and with America from the very beginning. But this Second Great Awakening is a different type of animal. Now Americans are becoming overtly Christian, and of course it is Protestant Christian, and they are taking sides on the slavery debate through Christianity now. So the anti-slavery discussion, conversation, such as it is, really begins to pick up during this period. Let's say, I don't know, the 1830s with the rise of the abolitionist movement. And now it's just more than, hey, how is slavery good for our nation? That there are many non-Christian, non-moral, amoral arguments against slavery. It disenfranchises the average white male worker. It inhibits progress and urbanization. It degrades white people who are involved with it. There are all of these arguments against slavery that are not overtly moral or Christian. But now Christianity comes heavily into the conversation, and people are throwing out words like slavery is evil, slavery is ungodly, slavery is demonic, and the rhetoric of hell comes to the fore. Those who are engaging in slavery are sinners, they are sinning, and they will go to hell. And on the opposite side, those who were pro-slavery said, hey, slavery is righteous, it is godly. We are Christianizing, we are civilizing these sort of heathen Black people, barbarian Black people. We are giving them Christianity. Such a disingenuous argument, I know, because this Christianizing project of Black people was going to be lifelong. It was going to go to the descendants of their black slaves, and it was going to be filled with a lot of work that produced money, right? This is Christianizing for you. And so now you had different sides, mainly two sides, going at each other and saying, you are evil, you are ungodly. This is God's will. This is not God's will. And this just amplifies and supercharges the argument. And it really makes it, perhaps more than ever, unbending. I mean, I don't know if you've ever had a Christian come at you with condemnation, and you are sinning, and you are it is supercharged in many ways. It is unbending, and this is what the Second Great Awakening did. And you will now have, rather, that's how it played out. And you will now have entire churches, the Methodists, the Baptists, Episcopalians, Lutherans, they will uh, split over the issue of slavery. Roughly pro and con, although it's a lot more complex than that. You can't say that just because, let's say, Methodists in 1844, 1845, if they split over slavery, everybody, I would say that most people who were on the Southern side, the Methodist South, they were pro slavery. But I wouldn't say that everybody on, quote unquote, the Northern side of it was was anti-slavery. They weren't along those lines. But if for simplification, you may think of it like that. So these churches were splitting over slavery. Many were leaving churches. They called them come outers because churches supported slavery. And so lines were being drawn more thickly, more distinctly because of the Christianization of America. Yes, slave revolts. In many ways, abolitionism, the anti-slavery movement was founded on the fact that Black people did not want to be enslaved. Black people wanted to be free, like every human being. And in fact, for many Americans, the sine qua non of humanity, the litmus test that you were a human, was that you wanted freedom, that you wanted to be free. And so Black people were making it very clear, crystal clear, clarion, that they wanted to be free. They did not want to be enslaved. And there was all types of resistance. We talked about quotidian resistance, that is like mundane, everyday resistance to slave revolts, where they were revolting against the system, and they were killing white people who were imposing the system. The most famous example, the Nat Turner Revolt in 1831 in Southampton County, Virginia, in which some 55 white people were killed and about 40 Black people were killed. All right, yes, we said that historians now estimate that on average, 1,000 Black people escaped slavery each year. And we've talked about how emancipation was really on a continuum, that Black people were getting free in all sorts of ways, including state emancipation, leading up, I would say, to 1830, maybe a little bit beyond. But northern states were outlawing slavery. Black people were suing for their freedom. Black people were purchasing their freedom. Masters were freeing Black people, and Black people were escaping. And there was a system of escape called the Underground Railroad, and that is a complex, a network of people and places and routes that would help enslaved Black people in the American South get free. And that was to the north, the American North, but also Canada. Okay, so this was steadily undermining the system of slavery, and this desiderata, this desire of Black people to be free, and the application of it. So they were getting free, did a lot to catalyze the Civil War. All right, we've also discussed the abolitionists. And the abolitionists, we said that they were playing the long game. It was a vigorous and engaged, fraught endeavor to free millions of Black people that were the warp and woof of the American economy, the American way of life, not just in the South, but also in the North. And they did much to push the issue that enslaved Black people must be manumitted, must be emancipated immediately. Immediately. And pretty much behind every kind of major push for slavery to be outlawed, you have abolitionists somewhere in there, influencing it. So they are bringing the issue of the immorality, the un American nature, the inhumanity of slavery to the public. They're constantly pushing that before the public through all sorts of media, all sorts of political mobilization and activism. And it's across the board. What does manifest destiny have to do with the Civil War? We've talked a lot about manifest destiny, which says that white people, white Americans, it is their divine destiny. God, the original real estate agent, God wants Americans, white Americans, to have dominion over the entire continent. So you start off with the colonies on the East Coast, and you expand all the way to California, eventually Alaska, eventually Hawaii, and then the entire hemisphere, really, the entire Western hemisphere. It is God's will that we subdue and have dominion, have control, rulership over this entire continent, this entire area. Now, what in the world does that have to do with the Civil War? Well, in each new territory that America acquires, there is a pitched battle for power between pro slavery forces and I don't want to say anti slavery forces, but let's just say politicians in the North. Each territory, so with the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, with the Compromise of 1850, the Mexican American War, all of this new territory that America acquires, will it be slave or free? And this is all about, you can look at this in the explicit lens, through the explicit lens of power and control. Who will have power? Whose way of life will win out? Will it be the slave power in the American South, or will it be free? And they are directly, it's like what, by 1850, I think it was like 11 states versus 11 states. 11 states are slave, 11 states are free, something like that. Right. And then it's 12 and 13. And so they are battling because they know that if any side prevail, if any side gets more states, free or enslaved, they are going to have the power and their agenda. It's a whole complex of political items will prevail, and America will be controlled by that interest. I guess today will be like the Republicans and the Democrats. Who's going to win? Who's going to get the most control? And maybe you could say that almost every decision that's made in America today, political decision, is like, what will this do for our control? What will this do for power? And it is a pitched battle because I would say definitely, today, it feels like each side, let's say we just want to make it binary, Republicans and Democrats, that each side thinks the other side will destroy America. And so this is almost like a life and death struggle. And this is how it became in the antebellum period as well. So the Compromise of 1850, from the Mexican-American War, America, you can fill in the adjective, but it annexed, it gained, it took, it grasped all of this area, right? So the present American West, for our purposes here, part of the Midwest and then the West, and what which part of this new territory will be slave, which part will be free, right? So this also played out in the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So Missouri will be slave and Maine will be free. But this is about the new territory gained, the new territory captured. Will this be slave or will this be free? And you can see that it's almost like equal. Okay, so one of the key battlegrounds of the Compromise of 1850 was the Kansas Territory. Roughly today's Kansas. Will it be slave or will it be free? And quote unquote settlers are actually going to Kansas and they are fighting it out. And some scholars say that this is when people like John Brown became radicalized. John Brown actually fought in Bleeding, Kansas. So these are actually white American settlers, and they're fighting for if Kansas will be slave or free. And the free wins out. The free wins. So Kansas becomes a free territory, and it is considered the North. But this just prefigures the greater civil war that's imminent, that's coming. All right, what is this international pressure about? Um, we know that Britain outlawed the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade in 1807. France outlawed it, Spain, Portugal. So all of the major European powers had outlawed it. And it's effectively, it is being outlawed in the Caribbean and in Central and South America. We know that the last nation, as it were, to outlaw slavery was Brazil in 1888, but that's an outlier. So there is international pressure to end this corrupt system, and America is not doing it. So America continues to enslave and oppress Black people, and they are increasingly seen by the international community as backward, and that this is a relic of the past, and civilized and advanced nations do not enslave people, but enslave Black people, this violent, heinous institution. And Black people and abolitionists, which is they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Abolitionism was built on Black people. They are increasingly making the case that Black people want to be free, and that slavery is built on violence, rape, coercion, oppression and injustice. So they are making this case in the media. As always, it's a media battle. It's always been about media on how people perceive and think about things, especially when you're in a quasi democracy, when you're in a semi democracy, right? It is about persuading people. And so internationally, America is getting pressured to stop this barbaric system. All right, what is the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850? For my money, this is one of the key catalysts, perhaps the key catalysts. As we said, there is a division between the North and the South, between free and the slave, and they are vying for power in Congress, in the Senate, Senate and the House of Representatives, in some individual states and territories, definitely in the minds of Americans. And there is this growing divide. There is this growing bifurcation between slave and free. And many Northerners have the white Northerners have the attitude, practice slavery, keep it down there, confine it down there. Don't put it in our faces. We're kind of fine with you just practicing it down there. Don't let it spread. Just keep it down there. But, and this is a very interesting phenomenon, slavery has to spread. It's almost, and we could talk more in depth about this, but it's almost built into slavery that it can't just stay in one place. It has to expand. So it's not a static thing. It has to be dynamic, because I think that Southerners always fear, and this could be a fact, that if it doesn't spread, and that if there are more free states and more free power, that the free power will outlaw the little that the slave states have. I hope that that makes sense. So let's say that all of the Western territory that is opened, that white Americans conquer, if all of that becomes free, then the slave power will continue to shrink in the political realm, in the economic realm, you name it, all realms of society, and that it will eventually be outlawed. We will lose our way of life. We will lose our economy. So it has to keep expanding. That is the thought. And that's what the slave power was operating on. And so the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 uh, demands by law that if Northerners see, hear about, have intel on escaped Black people are escaping from the South. They call them fugitive slaves. If you have any information on that, you are bound by law to report that information to authorities. If you do not, you could be jailed, you could be fined. I don't think you could ever be executed, but there are harsh legal penalties. There is social ostracism if you don't cooperate. And white Northerners are saying, if you don't get this foolishness out of our faces, we don't want anything to do with this. Get it out of our faces. We do not want to see slavery. We are benefiting from it. The economy is better for it. We are using the goods produced by enslaved Black people in the Northern factories and industry, but we do not want to participate in it. We do not want it in our faces. And the Fugitive Slave Bill is bringing slavery to the doorsteps, very literally, of Northerners. And Northerners are irate about this. They are indignant about this. But really, Northerners deserve this, in my opinion, because you cannot, it's the wolf by the ears, right? You cannot contain this. That is a fiction. This will come to your doorstep. You know, any evil in the country, you cannot just conscribe it or constrict it. It will come to you. You must deal with evil. All right, Uncle Tom's Cabin. President Abraham Lincoln famously said to Harriet Beecher Stowe here, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, this could be apocryphal, but when she came to the White House, he said, "So you're the little lady that started the war." Uncle Tom's Cabin was a fictionalized, so it was a novel, but it was in its way anti-slavery because it humanized Black people. It humanized enslaved Black people. And when this was a very well-written, popular novel, it was like a blockbuster movie of the time or a viral YouTube video, however you want to liken it to our present day. And it humanized enslaved Black people. in a way that I guess hadn't been done before. And so, you know how when you read a book or you watch a movie, you almost have to identify with the characters, especially if the characters are central, if they are the main character, you identify with them. So white people were identifying heavily with black people, with Uncle Tom and other enslaved black people, um, in Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it was implanting. This is sentimentalism. This is literary sentimentalism. It is implanting emotions in you or awakening emotions that weren't really active before. So now white people are identifying with black people, and they are saying black people, because we identified with them, because we felt emotions about them, they are now human like us, and they should have the freedoms, something like the freedoms that we have. That wasn't going to happen until, like, what, more than 100 years later. Some people say not now. That argument can be made, right? But they should exercise something like the freedoms that we have. So this is a huge boost to the abolitionist movement, to the anti-slavery movement, although it can be debated if Harriet Beecher Stowe was an abolitionist when she wrote it. Okay, the formation of the Republican Party, we know that, and this may, jangle some of you, but the Republican Party was actually formed on the foundation, on the platform that slavery should not expand to free states. So the new territory that was opened up, the Compromise of 1850, the Mexican-American War, slavery should not go to those states. Slavery should be confined to the American South as it was then, right? In the 1850s, let's say. And so it is sort of anti-slavery in that way. We could say that the Republican Party was founded on anti-slavery. I know that that's ironic, but the first Republican president is going to be Abraham Lincoln, and this is highly consequential. So the Republican Party gains the political power, right? Whereas before it was Jacksonian Democrats, which was a virulently racist party, and the Whigs, right? So there were other parties that were founded to eradicate slavery, like the Liberty Party, but it was short lived and it didn't take. But the Republican Party will become a mainstay in American politics, right? The Dred Scott decision, a lot of people have a problem understanding the Dred Scott decision, and it is actually very complicated. I think that it started in a Missouri court, and then it went to the Missouri Supreme Court, and then it got rejected a couple of times. So a couple of times Dred Scott lost, against, why am I blanking on the name? Sanford was who it ultimately became, but it was Sanford's mother. Yeah, you can see that even I'm confused about the about the details of it. Dred Scott is one of those things that you knew at one time, but then if you don't constantly refresh yourself on it, you lose the details. But Dred Scott was born enslaved, and he married, his wife Harriet Scott, and they are traveling with their masters. He was originally the slave of a man named Peter Below, and then I think Peter Below died, and then he was enslaved by another couple, and the man died, and it was just the woman. And they were traveling throughout free states. So by law, they should have been freed. There's a lot of legal complexity here, such as it is. Remember that we said, America and its laws are are very problematic because you are. I should use a word stronger than problematic. I really don't like that word, really, in this context. They are immoral and inhuman, and they are anti-human, and they are anti-black. And this is the problem with democracy. The majority can vote against the humanity and the basic human rights of a minority. That's the problem with democracy, right? But I guess it's the best we have, right? What else would you have? What everything's run by a small elite group of royals or whatever that they could go against the humanity of a broad swath, and they have in the past, right? And so Dred Scott wants to buy his freedom, but he can't. So he sues for his freedom. And this goes all the way up Missouri Supreme Court, all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And essentially, this man, Roger Taney, this is seen as one of the greatest miscarriages of justice by in a Supreme Court decision in U.S. history. He said Black people do not have citizenship rights, even in free states. They are not citizens. They have no rights, which you're bound to respect. Um, the territory of the Louisiana Purchase, the territory gained in the Mexican American War, is essentially are essentially slave states, or the slave power prevails there. And so Roger Taney it can be debated whether he was doubling down or whether he was retracting Black rights even more. But he said Dred Scott remains a slave. Black people are not citizens. Black people have no citizen rights. And essentially, the territories that are available, that are up for grabs between slave and free, they should be slave states. So people see this, white Northerners, let's say, of course, Black people, they see this as a total miscarriage of justice, and that Taney is going further than the law. It's a misreading of the law, and it is just totally treating Black people inhumane and not as citizens. This is so Taney's decision is so blatant and so brazenly anti-Black that even people who are like, definitely those who are on the fence are like, this is wrong. And it even moves those who weren't on the fence. Let's say they were sort of sympathetic to slavery. Now they're saying this is just overbearing. This is too much. So this is a great catalyst of further dividing people, further marking the lines of pro and anti-slavery, and even moving some people to the anti-slavery, let's say, side, if you want to say that. Okay, what are these congressional fights? There is a rich history of slavery in Congress. And I'm saying rich in terms of they were absolutely in conflict over slavery. The American Congress, senators, reps, even, they could never agree on what would happen with slavery. Because remember, this is about power. This is about personal power. This is about state power. This is about group power. This is about internecine white identity politics. So we don't even need to look at this as the humanity of Black people. White people have other reasons why they want slavery gone, and reasons why they want it to remain, right? And they're fighting about it. And so there's a gag rule, I think, in this second Jacksonian presidency, and it is saying that white people, Congress people, cannot discuss slavery at all. And this is an anti-abolitionist, anti-slavery measure. And they were fighting about this in Congress, pro and anti-slavery. Congress, they were all men back then. They were fighting against this. And the most notorious incident is when Charles Sumner, I believe he was speaking against in Congress. So the gag rule had been repealed, and he was speaking against the Compromise of 1850. He believed that all of these new states should be free states. And one congressman, I think it was one, he was so upset by Charles Sumner's anti-slavery speech that he almost beat him to death with his cane. And I think it was a swagger stick. I don't think that he needed the cane to walk. ambulate, I think it was a swagger stick, and he was beating him with the cane. And Charles Sumner really never recovered from his beating. And so, some people say the fight, the row between Jasmine Crockett and Marjorie Taylor Greene, or AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene, is unprecedented. It's very precedented, if you want to say that. There used to be drag out, knock down, drag out fights, mainly over slavery in the American Congress. All right, what is John Brown's raid? And shout out to the 5 Black men who raided with John Brown. John Brown had a philosophy, maybe we can say theology, that slavery could not be overthrown by quote unquote civil means. Forget about moral suasion, forget about arguing it in articles, forget about political mobilization. This was violence against Black people, slavery was. It was force against Black people, and it must be met with equal force. And by the way, I totally concur with John Brown's theology. Totally. The slave power, white people, white Southerners, they were not going to let go of enslaved Black people unless they were forced to. So you are forcing Black people to be slaves against their will. It must be met with opposite or greater force, right? To use Einstein. So this was John Brown's philosophy, and in 1859, he tries to overthrow um, the slave power, if you will, in Harper's Ferry. Back then it was Virginia. Now it's West Virginia, right? And I think that he knew, people argue a lot about, did John Brown know that it was doomed, or did he think that people would hear about it and then rally behind him and it would start a revolution, so to speak, to overthrow slavery? So people are divided on that. But this, more than ever, it spooked Southerners. So they said these Northerners are going to come and overthrow slavery. And it really empowered Northerners to say, okay, this is the example of somebody, a white man, by all accounts, an upstanding white man. This is what the media was saying, um, who took this measure, put his life on the line. He was executed, and he became, he had an apotheosis. He became deified, like an American saint, an American angel, demigod, if you will, right? That he has now given us power. He's given us the inspiration to act ourselves against this great evil. We're going to follow in his footsteps. So it had that kind of dual effect. All right. Of course, throughout this whole thing, there are north-south differences. It's amazing how a system like slavery, maybe it's not so amazing, can make you so culturally different than those who don't practice slavery. And it's a lot more complex than I'm saying, I know. But slavery became like the signifier, the indicator of these deep cultural differences. Okay, so we know that it's more than slavery, but it became, we talked about how somewhere around the Revolution, definitely during the Jacksonian period, these different eras when white people began to coalesce around a white identity, and this was in contradistinction to those who were not white. So this is real original identity politics. And by the way, identity politics is as old as human beings. Human beings are going to define themselves, going to form groups for power and identity against other people. So that's just almost like human, right? But white people were defining themselves in contradiction or distinction to Black people, to Native Americans, right? And even for a long time, British white people in America were defining themselves against other white people, right? Even the people of the British Isles. So the English are going to be against the Irish, against the Scottish, and definitely Germans. And when Germans and Italians are coming, those are like ethnic white people. And for a while, they were considered like black-ish. And so this identity politics is rife, but it becomes North against the South. And slavery is the defining sort of piece of this. Okay, the election of Abraham Lincoln. He's elected when? November 1860. And South Carolina is going to secede, I believe, in December of 1860 before he's inaugurated. So he's inaugurated, I believe, March, yeah, March 1861. And so, I know that Lincoln's been under a lot of fire, what, in the last 50 years, especially among, us as Black people, African Americans, let's say, even before Lerone Bennett. But, the forced into glory. So Abraham Lincoln was a political animal and he wasn't really deeply anti-slavery, definitely an abolitionist. He was kind of forced to do this to keep the Union. Well, whatever the case, Southerners knew that Abraham Lincoln being president was an existential threat to them and their way of life, namely slavery. So even before Abraham Lincoln took office, they began seceding. They began leaving the Union. What did they think about Abraham Lincoln? What they thought that made them do that was that he was anti-slavery and that he was going to maybe end slavery in their territories, definitely not let slavery progress into the territories that were up for grabs. He was going to trouble our way of life. He was going to reduce our power, and that it would be better to retain our power to keep slavery going, for us to leave the Union, for us to leave the United States because of Abraham Lincoln. So this is the key catalyst. Once again, I don't think I think it was just fine for Abraham Lincoln to just be a regular politician, right? Because perhaps as a politician, you are even more likely to overthrow slavery. I know that this is a controversial take, because he realized that it was just death to the nation. It was now to a place he believed where it was crippling America, in several key ways that were unsustainable. Now, he was divided on what I'm saying. I'm not saying he was 10 toes down with that, right? He was divided because he was trying to find a way to do everything, to be all things to all men, as it were, right? Because when the war started, Lincoln did not articulate that it was about slavery on the Union side. He just wanted to keep the Union together. Then, with the Emancipation Proclamation, by that time, by January 1863, even before then when he wrote it, he realized that the Union could not continue with slavery. And so, to the end, really, he was only against slavery because he realized that it could not coexist with America as it was. Right. So this is very nuanced. But like I said, um, the South knew, the Southern states knew that Lincoln was an existential threat to slavery and by extension their way of life. So South Carolina secedes, it declares independence, and then the Confederate States of America is formed. You can see the dates that the states are leaving. They are Most of them are before Abraham Lincoln is inaugurated, and so they see the writing on the wall. And this may be like a cheap one. We're talking about the catalyst for the Civil War. This may be a cheap one because some say, well, the war's basically already started here. But this is the drawing of the lines, and all of the hopes and dreams of the Republic, is built on America staying a union, right? And this is not that. So this is the original uh, treasonous states, treasonous elements. They are going against. I'm sort of speaking ironically because I have trouble with a nation built on slavery to begin with, obviously. But they are rebelling against the notion of America. This is anti-American. This is treasonous. There's a new union, Confederate States of America, CSA. There is a new flag. They have a new president, Jefferson Davis. They have a new capital, which is eventually Richmond, Virginia. You know what? 100 miles from Washington, D.C. So this is full on treason. It is a rebellion. It is a revolution, if you will. They're leaving the United States. And this is over. This is about Black people. This is about the enslavement, the control of Black people. And the Battle of Fort Sumter, what, in April 1861, this is the final catalyst. This is what directly starts the war. Fort Sumter is like an island. I think it's literally an island um, in South Carolina, Atlantic Ocean, but kind of like the Bay areas, a Bay area. And it is controlled by what are now Northern troops, and Southerners want them out of there. This is a symbolic fort, a symbolic stronghold, and they eventually get the Union soldiers, if you want to call them that already, the Northerners out of there, and this is effectively an act of war. Like we said, we want you to choose five or six of these catalysts. You can choose something different, but five or six of the primary causes of the Civil War, and we want you to explain them for the final exam.